Hi, Erica. Welcome to the podcast. I am so excited to have you on. It's been a long time. It's been like 7 years, I think, since we've seen each other in person.
I know. And it's so good to see your face. It's so good to feel your energy through the computer screen. I'm just so happy to be here, and I'm so glad to be here with you.
Yes. And we mentioned on our time before we clicked record that this is kind of a full circle moment for us because we met in 2015 in Philadelphia at the PsyOp conference, which is our industry's nerdy annual conference for industrial organizational psychologists. And so we both come from a similar background, but different journeys, different stories. And so I would love to hear more about you, what you do, who you are, what you do, and the impact you're looking to make on the world.
Oh, yes. Thank you so much. Yes, it has been. This has been a full circle moment. As you mentioned, I'm Erica Spitale, and I'm a native of Chicago. Even though I don't live there anymore, Chicago will always be home for only 6 months out of the year, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
And moved to Atlanta in 2016. And by background, I come from a family of scientists. And so it was really kind of innate in me to get into the science field some way, somehow. I thought I was going to be a doctor. And then, if you remember, I'm going to age myself, the show ER,
Yes.
I couldn't even handle that. And so, okay, well, I don't know how I'm going to be doing open heart surgery if I can't take the visual effects of a, NBC TV show. So, quick pivot, and I became a clinical psychologist. And so I am a licensed clinical psychologist, and I practiced in the mental health field for over 10 years before having an Oprah aha moment where working for a nonprofit and became more curious around the actual inner workings of the nonprofit versus serving the client. And so my curiosity led to this re-emergence of formal education and going back to school after my doctorate, no judgment, please, and getting a degree in IO psychology because, I can't leave the science and the human behavior piece behind. And decided to work in the healthcare system as a natural segue from mental health to business psychology in a healthcare organization. And I haven't looked back since. And I've been doing this amazing work for 7 years now, going on 8. And there's still a lot more to do. And so I am the head of talent and employee experience at EmployBridge. And I love the work I do, and I love the work I get to do with the teammates that I have.
I love that. And tell us more about kind of your why and what's the impact that you're looking to make on the world. I mean, you told us, it gave us a little bit of a hint into what inspired it, but what's the core?
Yeah, I have always been fascinated by humanity, why we do the things we do, why we say the things we say, how and why we think the way we think. And I think that's, obviously what spurred a lot of my mental health work. But regardless of the environment that we're in, we don't get to turn off the human button. And so there is just so much need and work required to ensure that 24/7, 365, we are doing for one another what we need to thrive in this world. And so I am just maniacally focused on centering the human experience in and out of the workplace 24/7, 365, and making sure that no matter how you identify and who you are, that you have equitable opportunities to do whatever it is you choose to do.
Oh, I love that. And I love your mission and your focus. Obviously, it rings home true for me with the work that I do. And so we're kind of in this together. We're in this like pivotal moment in history where I think we're seeing the shift happen. We're seeing the enlightenment, the light bulb come on with more people than ourselves, right? Because I feel like for a while we were just kind of talking to a wall, like humanity at work, it makes a difference. And now it's like, oh yeah, it does. What do you think are the barriers to that? Because that is something that I grapple with all the time. Is it the human condition? Is it the systems? Like, what are your thoughts on the barriers to that?
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind when you said that or asked that was the system. I mean, let's be honest for a second.
Mm-hmm.
Our society has been built in a way that serves individuals who identify a specific way more than others. And so that systemic pressure is the foundation with which businesses have been built.
Mm-hmm.
And so it is really like legacy retelling the same story, but just in a different book cover.
Right.
And that power that systems have rarely, rarely, sorry, I'm trying to think of the word I'm looking for. It's fundamentally almost impossible, right, for an individual to overcome that. And
Mm.
so, almost to your question, how do, in specific environments, how do we collectively overturn,
Mm-hmm.
change
Mm-hmm.
what the system has been conditioned to operate as so that we can have different conversations and say different things and feel different things and ensure that even though to your point earlier when we were talking offline, the one size fits all isn't necessarily the solution, but there are some table stakes that should
Mm.
fit all. And if we're
Yes.
centering the folks that historically have been marginalized, underrepresented, underserved, then we will most likely ensure that everyone benefits from whatever pivots and changes we need to make.
Mm. Yeah, 100%. And that's, when I tell people about what I do, because I think sometimes when we talk about systems, when we talk about marginalized communities, people are like, oh, you're in the DE&I space. And I'm like, no, I'm in the change and systems space. I just happen to be a Black woman who works in systems change. And yes, I bring life experience. But I think there's, been this interesting shift that we're seeing where it's like because we're talking about systems, we must be in the DE&I space. We must carve that out as DE&I when it is it is just baked in to how we do things. It's baked into from a societal and anthropology cultural perspective. We can't ignore the broader context of society and how it's operated and then just say, oh, that doesn't apply here in the workplace,
Right.
which is why I know you're heading up employee experience. So how does that take shape for you? How are you thinking about the employee experience journey from that lens of being a, I don't know, a lowercase culture in the context of a uppercase culture, if that question makes sense?
Yeah. I think one of the things that been diligent or tried to be as diligent as I can about is really identifying those key moments first. Because
Mm,
look, at the end of the day, when you think about somebody's experience, you've got part-time workers, you've got full-time workers, you might have shift workers. It is too insurmountable of a task to try to navigate or account for every hour, every minute of somebody's day or experience
mm,
in the organization. But there are absolutely key moments that you definitely want to double down on, lean in heavily on around how do we ensure that at least at these moments that we are curating and providing an experience that benefits who we bring in and also keeps who we bring in. I also think too, and this is maybe a little bit more taboo, but also humanly deselects who no longer serves the
mm,
organization. And I think we talk a
yeah.
lot about retention and attraction,
Mm,
but the caveat to retention is also making sure that those who stay have an experience that isn't detracted by those who may no longer be equipped to navigate and contribute in the way that they would have, maybe a year ago, 2 years ago, et cetera. And so I know that tends to be a little bit less talked about, but I think it's equally as important.
yeah, I love that. I mean, I have many analogies for culture and employee experience. One of them being a garden. The other one, which you'll appreciate, is kind of like the human body and the system, right? Like when you think about I don't know, like organ transplants, for example, they're either accepted or they're rejected. And so your body is a system. and how, and I know this is kind of an intense example, but how are you ensuring that the way you're building your culture and the experience within your organization is rejecting the bad stuff, right? That's what a system that is working to your aspiring culture is supposed to do. It should also have accountability structures, reinforcement structures that keep the bad stuff out, or keep the weeds from growing. If we're going back to the garden example, it's a whole ecosystem. To your point.
Absolutely. No, that's exactly it. And so, as much as we, to your point again, talk about approvals
Mm-hmm.
and inserts, we
Mm-hmm.
also should be talking about, okay, well, what are we discarding? What are we getting rid of? Whether they're behaviors, who are we, again, humanistically letting go of?
Mm-hmm.
All of that. Yes.
Yeah, 100%. And what I mean, we talk about culture, you talk about employee experience. It's, we also talk about inclusion, and I think we're overusing a lot of words these days. Inclusion, belonging, oh, those all sound fabulous, and yes, they sound very human. But what do you think about the role of exclusion to the point of it keeping the integrity of culture and what you're trying to build, and then how do we start that conversation in a way that's real? Because I do think there is an element of exclusion when it comes to ensuring that the system is working properly. I don't, yeah, I'm kind of like talking off the cuff here, but what do you think about that? Does that resonate?
It does. And I love it. And I mean that in the most, empathetic way. But look, we exclude every day. I mean, let's be honest. When you think about why businesses have been put in place, it's to make money.
Mm-hmm.
And when businesses realized they couldn't make money without people, that's when people came into the equation.
Mm-hmm.
And so businesses who are trying to make money through people have a set of criteria around, for certain roles, what skills and responsibilities these roles will have. If you don't foot the bill, you don't get in. That's exclusion. And so, why would we assume that that trend or that practice ends at hiring? No, it continues, because if the goal is to continue to make profit once person is in said seat, well, then there have to be other markers for what is profitable and what isn't. And if that's your exclusionary criteria, great. I mean, there can be others, but I think the practice of exclusion is organically a part of keeping a business afloat and keeping a business successful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I've grappled with this a lot because I work with some organizations that, for example, have during when George Floyd was murdered, for example, decided to publish an anti-racism statement, or reevaluate their values and their purpose. And you know on the surface we see these commitments to a philosophy, or not even a philosophy, a purpose that is aligned with something that might exclude some people, aka racists or people who have inherent bias or discrimination against other people. And so I'm fascinated by this idea of exclusion, and when it's okay, and when bias is involved, and it prevents equitable opportunities for people. And so that could be like a whole nother podcast episode, but I do think it feeds into this employee experience conversation, which is, how can we be clear and kind at the same time? How can we merge and intersect the interests of business and people, because we're all here for a reason, to your point. And how do we ensure that we're holding people accountable to those things, whether it is something like, we are an anti-racist organization, we don't tolerate microaggressions or racist behavior in any way, shape, or form, or any bias-driven exclusion behavior, or if it's you're not meeting your metrics and your goals. what are some of the moments, I guess, in between that are really important for employers to stay clear and kind at the same time? So what are some of the maybe tactics that and the systems that reinforce that balance?
Yeah, that's a great question. The first thing that comes to mind for me, because I'm heavily involved in leading my organization through this, is in performance and talent development.
Mm-hmm.
And so feedback, right? Communicating. How am I set up to have the necessary conversations with my teammates to ensure their success?
Mm.
And am I doing that, to your point, in the clearest and kindest way? And also, I would say time relevant too, because I think you can be clear and kind, but 2 weeks too late.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so, how am I, to your point earlier, intersecting the clarity and the kindness with timeliness? And am
Yes.
I prioritizing the clarity
Mm-hmm.
and kindness for some versus others? So, I
Mm.
absolutely think that's the first like thought that comes to mind around that. I also think just in the everyday. And so, again, as a leader, and I put a lot on leaders, like I fully recognize that the shift in expectations of leaders has been massive.
Mm.
And so, as a fellow people leader, folks, like, trust me, I say this with also accountability and responsibility for myself to do what it is I'm saying. But I also think in the one-on-ones, whether even if you're not coaching, it is just in how are you showing up? How are you creating space for your teammates to bring whatever they need to bring to that conversation? I think one of the biggest shifts I've experienced in my career in going from an individual contributor to a people leader is I used to think that the one-on-ones were for my leader,
Mm.
not
Mm-hmm.
for me as the direct report. And I can't remember the day, but I do remember the time period where there was this shift in a leader I had who helped me better understand, like, no, this is for you and about you. Like, what's your agenda? I was like, oh, I
Mm.
get to go first.
Right.
So
Yeah.
small like shifts like that can truly change how someone feels safe
Mm.
enough to show up, comfortable enough to show up, and how authentically someone is able to show up. Those are the two that come to mind immediately for me.
Yeah, I think it gets back to this conversation around equity, which is, and again, I'm kind of shifting into, I'm going through the letters in DE and I, but I wanted to kind of highlight the shift here, which is, I think there are inclusive behaviors, and we need to focus on inclusive leadership, which means knowing enough about your people as human beings, what motivates them, what stresses them out, what are their boundaries, do they have things going on personally that may impact their performance? All of those things are grounded in equity because now I can adjust to ensuring that you have all the tools you need to be successful for equal outcomes, right? And that's what we're really talking about when we talk about inclusion and equity together.
Yep.
Is there is discretion and intuition and skill from a leadership perspective and effort and responsibility and all these words to be able to say, I am impacting this human being on a day-to-day basis, and I have a responsibility to learn about them. They're not a chess piece. They're not a cog in a wheel. They're a human being. And so from an employee experience perspective, how can I start to learn more about human behavior, about this person's story? I think the thing that I see most is leaders are kind of looking to their VP of employee experience or their CHRO and saying, do the people stuff. You're the expert. And it's like, you also should be keeping up on trends around sociology, psychology, anthropology. Like, human behavior is a very large part of the equation when it comes to the way that work systems actually happen and how results actually get accomplished.
Oh my gosh. Yes, all the things you just said. What you just made me think of is the fear I think a lot of people leaders show up with in not knowing where to start. And that is extremely valid, like 100%
Yes.
valid. But what you made me think about is if we could all just lean into being curious
Mm-hmm.
and being okay or more okay with, so maybe, yeah, maybe you asked the wrong question. Maybe you said the wrong thing. Maybe you didn't ask the right question. Maybe you didn't say the right thing. We are conditioned as humans to be very forgiving.
Mm-hmm.
And especially when we understand that there's care underlying the curiosity, like
Yes.
authentic care. And so, to your point, it just takes effort and it just takes a little intention. And how do we insert the effort and intention and curiosity in every moment, not just when we think it matters, not just when we're
Yes.
comfortable, not
Yes.
just when we think we have time, just all the things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to your point, it comes down to treating others the way they want to be treated versus, this like golden rule that we've been taught, treat others how you want to be treated. But that's not inclusive. That's not equitable because we're all different, and that's where the diversity comes in, which is really table stakes, as we know. Understanding that you will have a diverse force, understanding that you have different perspectives, backgrounds, limitations. There's many different things that underlie that concept of intersectionality and diversity. So it's becoming more. I mean, it's always been important, I think, for leaders to come with a sense of, I think, humbleness too is another word that comes to my. Humility is the word I'm looking for. Humility and curiosity are both really key inclusive behavior constructs that are important for leaders to navigate, I think, the modern world of the workplace, but also showing up as a good human being in general. Like you said, outside of work, inside of work, it's some of the same characteristics.
Yes. I love that you said that, because you made me think about, um, if we can sit in the curiosity a little bit longer, how much better off we'll be. And you made me think about, why would we behave any differently outside of the workplace than we would in the workplace? So one of the things I absolutely
Mm.
like cannot stomach is when companies call their employees family.
Oh, Lord have mercy. Yes.
Let's take a moment of silence. Yes. Okay. And so
Mm.
if you peel it back though, and typically when you ask like where that comes from or why they do it, what the logic makes sense, the logic, but the impact doesn't. The impact, so the intent is one thing, the impact is another. And I think back to your kind of dissecting of D, E, and I, if if the intent is to convey that we should be treating each other as if we are connected in the most personal and intimate way, i.e.,
Mm-hmm.
family, cool. But that is not that word for many, for a lot of folks, means a myriad of different things that you as an individual cannot account for. If I am a CEO responsible for 3,000, 2,000, 10,000 people, I cannot possibly know what that one powerful word means to everyone. But what I do know is that it probably means different things: positive,
Mm-hmm.
neutral, and maybe even negative. And so, how do I convey the same sentiment around, yes, how you would treat your family in ways around um, communication and uh, 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 devoting time and
Mm-hmm.
energy and effort and intention, like all the things we just talked about? How do you do that in a way that includes most, if not all, through language that may not be so loaded and personalized because of people's experiences, upbringings, backgrounds, etc.?
Yes. Yes. I agree with you 100%. Family is not the word you're looking for, y'all. It's just not. Because you don't fire family. You don't have family. I mean, obviously, you don't want dysfunction in your organization, which, I mean, unless that's a part of your culture, statement. I don't know if that's even considered, but yeah, I don't think you want dysfunction, because a lot of times family is dysfunctional. I mean, chosen family, maybe. That gives me a little bit more of a fuzzy feeling, but I agree with you. I think the sentiment is there where, we can show up to each other as our authentic selves, I think is kind of the core to that. And that's in the most idealistic family unit, that's what you would want. But I think it also devalues and underestimates the work
Yes.
behind building, holding people accountable, the integrity around culture, and
Yes.
creating psychologically safe spaces. Because yeah, you maybe wouldn't fire a family member necessarily.
Yeah.
And I think it's just it's a very poor way to paint the picture of what you're really trying to achieve, which is we are trying to work towards a goal collectively,
Mm-hmm.
but we also acknowledge the individual diversity and the fact that everyone else has their own families, by the way, that we're
Yes.
all dealing with. So when you come into this space, it is not family. It's a high performing team where you can contribute and you're able to learn from really talented people. And it's contributing to your overall story,
Yes.
and the purpose that you have and the mission that you have while you're on this earth, right? We're trying to enrich you as an individual.
Yes.
So yeah, I agree with you 100%. And I also think that families can be very homogenous, right? So when you are in a family unit, there are things that are really focused on generations within the family, but you have a diverse workforce. And so things like code switching, I think, to your point, is something that resonates with me a lot, because I spent my entire career in corporate and I had the work face and I had my work voice, right? Like everyone around me was like, who is that? Who's talking? That's not Angela. And then I have my usual, hanging out with my friends, my community,
Yes.
completely different person. And that was
Yes.
exhausting. Absolutely exhausting. So yeah, if I'm joining a company that's someone else's family and I have to code switch and I have to listen to examples that don't resonate with me or have nothing to do with my upbringing or things that don't celebrate my differences and the communities that I come from, then yeah, that becomes really exhausting for people. I have to fit into
Yes.
your family versus you're celebrating mine.
And or celebrating the family we're trying to create.
Yes, absolutely.
So to your point, knowing that more times than not, family origins are homogenous. Well, okay. So to your point, like how do you add an adjective or some other descriptor to that family word to differentiate between what you may be accustomed to and or coming from and what we are building here?
Yes.
100%
Yes.
agree. 100% agree. And just to add this topic, yes, code switching. I cannot tell you if there was any reflection of all the reflection that I did around the pandemic, which we're really still in, by the way. Let's just also be clear about that. It was the silver lining of not having to show up, and I'm doing air quotes, in ways that fit the response and reaction I was looking for versus just showing up as me. I remember, and just a quick example. So don't get me wrong, I love to dress up. So you will catch me in heels, you will catch me in dresses like that. That is a core part of who I am. But when the pandemic hit and we went to remote or virtual, I started showing up in hoodies.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember a teammate being surprised and making a comment as if how I showed up at work somehow was always how I showed up, even on the weekend at the grocery store. Like every environment outside of it was like, I only see you this way. So this must be the only way you show up. And it's like, I'm multi-layered just like you are. I love the gym, as we talked about. I do not show up at the gym in heels and a J. Crew dress.
No. If you did, that would be impressive, but no.
It would. And I might try it just for TikTok, but like, that's not the norm, that is not me. It would be for social media likes. Like,
right. Right. And that is, I mean, that is real. I mean, code switching has always been a topic that I think has grown in popularity now that people are denouncing it basically and rejecting it. And so what is professionalism, right? And going back to the employee experience, how can we create moments where we can celebrate the way people show up? I think this is the connection that I'm taking back here to the employee experience, because it's not just about adding on or curating experiences. It's also creating the space to allow people to show up as they are and to celebrate them, because those are two different things. From my perspective, we can acknowledge there's differences, but truly celebrating them is a totally different thing. And we tend to celebrate the majority, and we don't celebrate the things we're not familiar with or seem different. And to me, that's the key difference. Just saying like, oh, it's Black History Month and let's talk about Black culture is learning, it's acknowledgement, sure. But are you then taking that back throughout the year and celebrating that? Are you asking, you're asking people what that looks like for them? So that's the differentiator, and not a lot of organizations are doing that. They're acknowledging, they're not celebrating.
I love that differentiation, Angela. I do. I love that so much. And I think you're right. And you made me think about what we talked about earlier around the golden rule. I think we acknowledge based on how we would want to be acknowledged. And if we don't identify with the community that we're trying to acknowledge, what is the word I'm looking for? It's just very myopic in thinking, very narrow in thinking. And instead, to your point, have we asked individuals, communities that are contributing their all to this organization, how they want to be acknowledged and celebrated? And to your point as well, not just during Black History Month, how about the other months of the year? Would it be more meaningful to them if they actually saw it in the everyday versus only boxed into the 28 days of the shortest month of the year? Don't get me started. And so to your point, how do we go a step beyond what we think, for those who are making those decisions, is significant and impactful enough, and really ensuring that we're doing it for and with the individuals we are saying that we are doing this for?
Yes. Doing with is a very important piece. The term "nothing with us, without us," right? Nothing for us without us. What is that the right term?
Yes.
Nothing for us without us. Yeah. So basically the essence of that is, do not go and try to contribute something performatively without truly understanding it and involving the people, the communities that you're trying to impact. Because at the end of the day, I have a different experience, right? You have a different experience. And all of us our identities are very intersectional. But we need to recognize when we're kind of out of our lane a little bit and realize that we, come from a different background and we may not have all the information or truly understand the experience. And we shouldn't speak for other people. We shouldn't speak for other communities. So that is, I think, a great point around, doing things with people. And then again, back to celebrating. Then how do you celebrate that or create spaces where it could be celebrated? And also checking your bias and checking these traditions that we've created within the workplace that are not serving everybody.
Yep.
The happy hour, right, is one of those things that I think we just need to, we need to rethink, right? I mean, it's come up in a few conversations, I think, from an inclusion perspective. Celebrating certain holidays only, right, is another thing. And so someone's like probably listening is like, why would you not celebrate Halloween or celebrate, go to a happy hour? There's many reasons. And I think the main thing about all of these things is not that we don't want to celebrate Halloween, we don't want to celebrate Christmas, we don't want to celebrate these Christian-based holidays, or have a drink with our fellow team. But think about the exclusion it can also present to certain communities. Think about folks in the Muslim community who cannot drink, or you're serving certain foods at a happy hour that are not, again, celebrating
Yep.
the culture or the holidays that are acknowledged. So
Yep.
these are all things that I think if we just kind of got out of ourselves a little bit, and then also not shaming and making people feel guilty for not attending these things,
Yes.
is another thing that is just like, it flies under the radar. Those comments of, oh, you're not going to join, and those things are also really damaging and detrimental to the experience of employees.
I love that you said that, because two things come to mind. One is, to your point, instead of shaming, why don't you ask?
Mm-hmm.
Go back to the curiosity we were talking about. Ask why, so that next time you may be able to curate or create or send a calendar invite for something that is more inclusive, because now you have leaned into curiosity to understand why someone may or may not attend such events. I also think, to your point too, like, we're always as humans asking, what's in it for me?
Mm.
And to your point earlier, why someone may decline a Halloween celebration, a happy hour, etc., if there's nothing in it for them, why, why
Mm-hmm.
would they go?
Right. We have to be okay with that. We have to be okay
Yes.
with this idea. I think too. I think the traditional model of the workplace and how it's been navigated is very white male focused, right? Golfing, right? There's these informal opportunities to build business, to build relationships, and I'll tell you what, like, happy hours, golfing, not my thing. So how can I now have an equitable experience, an opportunity to network? What opportunities are you creating for me as someone who does not enjoy golf, who does not enjoy, honestly, spending time with coworkers outside of work hours, an
Yes.
introvert? These are all differences that
Yes.
you may be excluding when you're using traditional perspectives of what professionalism is, what networking means, how power comes to be, the networks within your organization. All of these things are ways to include or exclude, and unfortunately, traditionally, they've excluded
Yes. And I
within
feel
the
like what you,
organization.
yes, sorry. And I feel like what you just tapped into again was this idea around access and representation.
Hmm.
Because if the folks who are doing the planning of said events, if it's a homogenous group, that probably, all the things we just talked about will probably not surface in the conversation. Why would it?
Right.
At the same time, okay, so let's pivot. So let's say I learned from planning an event or a moment that wasn't inclusive. So then, how do I, to your point, provide access to other moments
Mm-hmm.
or
Sure.
events with the same outcome and impact, i.e., how do I get visibility because I do want to be promoted? How do I get visibility just to share my thoughts because I care about what this organization does? Like, how are we still grounded in the fact that we may not get it right every time, but we are coming behind to say, okay, I've learned from that, and now I'm going to expand or widen my net to ensure that those who may have been left out can be brought
Yes.
in.
Absolutely. I love this. I love this. I mean, we could go on and on probably for another 3 hours, but I want to kind of tie a bow on really how I'm summarizing our chat today is it's employee experience and DE&I multiplied. Kind of we're combining these two topics, which I love. And I mentioned earlier to you, a lot of times people look at the work we do around change, around inclusivity, equitable outcomes at work, and they're like, "Oh, you're a DE&I expert." And I oftentimes like, I guess, but really, I don't characterize myself as that. I'm focused on system change. You're focused on employee experience, and so it's really, sometimes I think we can kind of carve out DE&I when really it's diversity, inclusive behaviors, equitable outcomes is how we should be building the system. And so I just love the fact that we talked about how we can shape and curate the employee experience to focus on moments that matter for everybody, because we are all humans. And actually, there are certain things within us that are actually moments that matter, right? Transitions, um, life events. Like, these are all things that as a company you can do for everybody. But that additional layer, which is equally as important, is how are you celebrating the differences within your workforce? And how are you not only acknowledging and learning about them and making them known, but also celebrating learning about people not only as humans, but humans that are really complex and multi-layered. And I love this conversation and where it's going. And I'm so excited about your work, Erica. The organization you work for is really lucky to have you. And I know you're doing broader changes in this space. So tell us how we could find you. If someone's like, I just love this conversation, I want to reach out to Erica to learn more, how can we find you?
Yeah, no, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. So Erica J. Spitale. That's probably where it's easiest to find me. Any direct inquiries, you can always email me at erica.spitale@employbridge.com. Other than that, like, hey, listen to Angela's podcast because it's amazing. And thank you so much for what you're doing, for giving us all who care about what's next and trying to build what's next. Thank you for giving us space and place to have these conversations, to do this work, and to truly believe that change is possible.
I love that. Yeah, thank you for helping me envision something different and talking about, the responsibility of, organizations to do this work. It's not just us, right? Like, we are in the field of and in the business of changing not people, but changing how we think about paradigms that aren't serving everybody. So I'm just very honored to be a partner in crime, I guess, is what I was thinking, but maybe that's not the right word. Partner in change, PIC, partner in change.
Love it.
So thank you, Erica. Appreciate you.
Thank you.